million of those improvements. So there's a lot of work being set aside, improvements deferred, capital projects deferred. And so I do want to explain each one of those areas. So I mentioned the number one theme, financial sustainability. But the council also, in looking at the various issues over the years, said it's absolutely important that we evaluate and implement our facility improvements into our infrastructure needs. And that means buildings, structures, fire stations, police stations, as well as our streets, our storm sewer, pipes, everything within that. Make sure we're looking long-term, big picture, rather than just what do we need for streets and what do we need for fire department, what do we need for fire trucks, what do we need for snowplows. I want to make sure that it's all inclusive. And so the one area that we looked, or excuse me, the three areas that we really broke the budget down and what we're recommending, and these are actual impacts on you as taxpayers next year in the three key areas. The first key area was the public safety facilities. I'm sure you've heard and read about it in the paper. We're definitely looking at our fire stations. We're looking at our police department. We're looking at the MCC. Those are the three areas that really, as we did a critical look over the last couple of years, we really need to implement those into the findings. Well, we also have been looking at our streets and doing a good job. We've got 10 years of that work under our belt. Not that we're done, not by any means, but clearly the council wanted to add that in. The debt service fund is literally to pay for that 10 years worth of streets work and things that are ongoing. And then as we look at the overall budget, how do we operate the city? And one of the factors that we looked at when we talked about financial sustainability was that over the years, as we've tightened our belt and cut back, is that we put more money from what should have gone into facilities and replacement of our infrastructure has been shifted over to the operating side and the daily expenses. And so trying to find that balance is really how we're defining financial sustainability. But you can't decide how much to spend on facilities until you know how much you really and what the impact on your operating expenses are going to be. So let's look at those three critical areas. First, the public safety facilities. And I'm going to go through this rather quickly if you want me to stop and explain it, but it's very important that you understand how high a priority that this is going to be. We are looking at 2 new fire stations. Of course, if you don't know, that means we're also closing 3. So our net is simply the point of we're going to have less fire stations. But we need one near the 3M campus, and we're literally going to rebuild Fire Station 7. So we are going from 5 to 3 fire stations. We're implementing that, changing what's happening, but we are probably going to put a new fire station somewhere on the 3M campus, somewhere in that area. $3 to $4 million is our estimate within the plan. But the fact is, the London Lane station and the station on Century Avenue literally are at the point where they're almost uninhabitable. They have electrical problems, leak roofs, to the point where it's going to cost a lot of money to rebuild those. And it simply doesn't meet the needs of our community, and they need to be invested in or a new station centrally located. Chief Lucan will tell you, if you ask him, he has a difficulty finding enough people to respond to the calls at those fire stations. If you only have 3 or 4 people that go to the London Lane station, when the alarm goes off, people need to respond. So our service delivery with one station to cover that area with more of a part-time and a full-time staff is actually better than having firefighters in that area. And Chief Lucan can go into that in great detail. Fire Station 7 is the one at Hazelwood and County Road C. It's an old station, but it needs to be upgraded in order to get to that point of just having a local fire department who responds, or we can't get people to respond, to having more of a part-time or a full-time staff who are there on a 24/7 basis. A much quicker response time, even though they may have to go a greater distance than what they have in the past. Last point I'm going to make on that, just so we understand. A paid per call gets a call at his home, has to drive to the station, get in the truck, and then drive to your call. Someone at the station can go a lot further because he's there, gets in the truck when he gets the call, and can go a long ways. Thus, we're able to provide better service with less stations. But $6 million is what we're going to have to spend. That was not in last year's plan. Okay? So we've really changed the focus. In addition, while we have fire trucks, and we're not going to need quite as many, in previous years, the city put away about $100,000 a year of your tax dollars to buy and replace fire trucks. Okay? A new fire truck costs about $450,000. We are projecting not having to replace another fire truck till 2016. But if you do the math, $100,000 a year starting next year, we'll have about $450,000 in 2016 ready to buy one new fire truck. So that's in the plan. What's there right now, that's the next fire truck replacement. The police department expansion. Our police department, we moved into this building in 1986, and I'm just young enough to have been here when we did that. So we, in this area, had 42 police officers and built it to that size. We now have a sworn staff of 55. And if you've ever not taken a tour of the police department, for those of you that will even take you into the men's locker room, it is unbelievable how undersized it is. And if you've ever talked to a police officer who wears a bulletproof vest, they describe it to me as wearing a baggie. So you can imagine what it's like at the end of the day when you take that off. They need to be dried out so that when you put it on the next time, obviously we don't need to go further than that, but we have no facilities for that. So you go in that room and there's floor fans, ceiling fans, fans everywhere trying to dry that out. We don't have the locker space. We don't have the ability to provide the necessary facilities for our officers. We have, in 1984, we had one computer in that department. As you can imagine now, we have a number of officers who are assigned to computer crimes. Okay? And there are certain things that they have to check on and look at that certainly shouldn't be on somebody's desk to walk by and look at on a particular screen. But we don't have a space for them. So you can see how we've changed dramatically in the 27 years since we built that facility. And it's those kinds of needs, the expansion. What we're talking about with $825,000, a decision that the council hasn't made and won't make until June or July, is literally either an expansion out into the courtyard or a relocation of, sorry Sean, some of the community development staff. Hopefully it's not a shock to her, but some of the staff may get located out of this area to move some of our existing police divisions into where community development is. Community development isn't getting kicked on the street. There's a whole office area up near Public Works where they used to office just a number of years ago. And so we're looking at various places and just using some of our existing space. We also have a deficit in our ambulance fund. One of the things that's going to impact us is our continuing reliance on Medicare. About 60% of our calls are Medicare. We lose money on every one. If you don't know that, haven't heard the council talk about it, it's simply the way of things are. We have a cash shortfall. And with all of these items, we're simply going to have to continue looking at our ambulance fund. The one part of the ambulance fund is actually it's breaking even, but we made some decisions in 2009 based upon a missed entry, and we actually were taking money out of the ambulance fund in order to support and keep the tax levy down. So an accounting shift caused a portion of the shortfall. We now have to make that up, and simply borrowing money is no longer going to occur. But the key point is the bottom bullet on this screen, because that is we're proposing about a 2% increase in the levy. How the council does that, they can obviously just increase the levy, or they can cut services somewhere else. But the plan assumes new money of a 2% levy increase to get new fire stations, start addressing the police problem, a fire truck, and the ambulance fund. What's not funded, I talked about that $37 million of requests that weren't there. In public safety, the fire training facility, also called marshlands. One of the items that we talk about trying to implement that facility over at 5 and 120, you can guess at the state, we had asked for some bonding money. I personally don't think it's going to happen, and unless it does, we simply can't implement marshlands. And that is a complicated system. We have a grant, but we have to own the property. We can't get the property from MnDOT until we commit to do wetlands, but we can't do that until we get the money from the state. So it all is tied together in a long, complex process. But we've simply put this project on hold until at least next year when we think we'll have a better chance at some bonding money. So that project is not currently in the CIP. Chief Lucan said in order to do the fire station items, he needs to rehab 3 stations. Sorry, that's going to have to wait till post-2016. So literally going to have to put on the back burner for 5 years. A new police facility, $10 to $15 million proposal. Should we provide an entirely new police facility? As staff, we're recommending not. If you do, the council has talked about and might consider a referendum for these police expenses, but at this point in time, this capital improvements plan does not assume a new police facility. It assumes remaining in this building. And, as I talked about, operational cuts. These are cuts in operating expenses for the city. Police department of $150,000, the ambulance fund $110,000, and the fire department $100,000. So again, operating cuts of expenses, of existing expenses in order to make some of these things work. Moving on, debt service. This will provide an additional $250,000 for the payment for some of the bonds that have been sold. Our payments on bonds have been put together. We'll actually peak and beginning in 2015 begin about $1 million a year decrease. We just got reaffirmed for our bond rating. We're the second highest in the state. There's only about 11% of the government agencies in Minnesota that have a better bond rating than Maplewood. We were affirmed as a very strong city, well financially planned, a good strong base, and so we're now borrowing money at 3.1% is what the city borrows money at. It is bond rate, which is very good. It's a great time, I guess, to be borrowing money. But the key point is that 83% of our debt will be retired in less than 10 years. Okay? So, in effect, that's exceptional according to Moody's, and that's a national rating service that puts that on there. And after the financial turmoil of the last 3 years, to get that kind of rating is very, very important. They're not giving those kinds of ratings out very easily anymore. We will continue a very reduced street replacement program, but it will be reduced by nearly 60% over what we've expected over the last 10 years for the next 3. We are reducing the program, and that's going to have a direct impact on one of the items that you as a commission were involved in, and that is meeting the goals of our NPDES permit, our National Pollution Discharge Elimination System permit, where we're saying we're going to reduce the runoff from the city back to that 1988 level of our stormwater plan. We were doing that through our street program. We're no longer going to be meeting the goals that we originally established. So we're going to start falling behind on that. But in order to meet all the other priorities, we're simply going to take a 3-year check and say, at this point in time, we're not going to be able to continue to meet all the requirements of that. Now, it's certainly still within the plan. There's still some other projects going on, but we're not going at the same direction we were 1 year ago. We're reducing it by 60%. Gladstone, we were assuming 2 phases of Gladstone. Just got off the phone right before I came in. The developer is ready to go. Project's going to start in June on the first phase. We're assuming the second phase, but the council's approved all of those improvements. Also not in this program, this is a lot of what Public Works does, but on the operational side, again, where I talked about police, fire, and ambulance being cut, so is Public Works. They'll be cutting $150,000 out of their operating expenses. Finally, onto that operational side, this is the third component. Number one, if you don't know, the city employees, you've heard about this a lot. Cost of living for the city employees this year is 0%. Okay? No city employee got a cost of living increase. We are in a 2-year agreement. The employees agreed to make some major revisions in their health care plan, and in exchange for that, the city offered them a 1% cost of living increase for 2012. With all of those costs, our 2-year costs for the city are less than 1%. They're about but it's still costs of services and costs of employees are going up $125,000. Fuel. We're currently paying $2.80 a gallon for gas. We're on a contract, and so we signed a contract early this year, and that's very good. However, that contract expires in December of this year, and I believe that fuel will be $4 a gallon next year. That will cost the city about $75,000. And the IT fund. That's one of the areas where I mentioned we borrowed money. We simply had a little extra cash in one fund, and we simply can't do that anymore. They're out of cash. And so in order to keep the IT fund current, we will need about $40,000 in that area. The Maplewood Community Center Fund, Council's approved a project to do $150,000 to redevelop the pool this year. For those of you that spend time over there, the pool is in a little tough shape. It's not generating the type of revenue from usage because of a lot of the competition, and simply it's 15, 18 years old, and it needs some help. If you look up in the locker rooms and look around, there's some, not mold, but there's rust. It needs some improvements, and so we're going to do some improvements. We're also going to provide new capital over at the MCC in 2012 of $100,000. So facilities that need improvement. The MCC fund has been running a fairly large deficit. Mr. Kaneko has been charged with putting a plan together and has developed a 5-year plan to make that sustainable. Okay, and so one of the major areas of the city, and certainly there are some staffing reductions that are occurring in that area. In addition, one of the goals of the council has been to start putting some money away for replacement of our park equipment and upgrading of our fields. We certainly have tennis courts and things that are in pretty tough shape, and some backstops and some fences. It's not a lot of money, but we'll be, in 2011 we only put $45,000 to that. Next year we propose to put $100,000. What's not being funded? The community center will still be short about $150,000 to $200,000. Again, it's a problem, one of the areas being worked on, but I mentioned it's a 5-year plan. Park development. Unfortunately, one of the things we're having to do is cut about $140,000 per year out of parks, of the needs and the requests. We're not getting the development we've seen in the past. We don't expect it to happen, and so we delayed park improvements at Joy Park, Goodrich, and Legacy. Simply areas where we simply would recognize a need is there, but this is one of the areas, unfortunately, that we had to recommend removals. In addition, just like the other departments, various other departments in the city are going to have to see operational cuts. So it all goes back to that point we made. A little too much on the operating side, shifting to the facility side to get to that financial sustainability area. Now, how does that all impact? That whole big picture, setting the stream. What are the key issues? And I'm sure you have others. What clearly are included? Number one, items that are included. We will be doing a Gladstone Savannah cleanup. After all these years, we're finally going to start that project, and it's underway. The design's underway. We'll likely go through the design and improvements this summer and start construction and finally clean up the Savannah and really put it to its long-term intended use next year during the summer construction season. Second, Sean was very adamant that we get this project on the front burner. And so we have dedicated a fair amount of funds. We're doing the investigation now. We're looking for grants. But we've got to clean up of that city landfill, city dump, whatever you want to call it, down McKnight and Century, north of Maryland, near Jim's Prairie, feed products area, wherever you want to describe it. But that is now in the plan. It will be funded and proposed to be funded. Construction to start possibly as early as next year, but for sure in 2013. And Fish Creek, we are proposing that as a very high priority. We're proposing the purchase. Council will be reviewing that in June to possibly purchase the entire site through the Land Conservation, is that what it is? Land Conservation Fund. We'll do in the purchase, we'll be signing an agreement, and simply we will be the owners. Whether we have to develop the northern portion or not is set in the CIP for a decision in 2013, so we'll have a few years to determine. But that is one of the highest priority items on the parks and open space side, is protecting that area, and a lot of the funds go into that particular project. What's been deferred? What's not included? As I mentioned, we're being reduced about 60% of what we were planning. So that's one of the things that we're going to have to work through during the year is our permit. We're going to have to figure out how we're going to meet our permit requirements. Second, in the past, we've done about $50,000 to $70,000 worth of wetland enhancements every year, and that program simply, all the funds have been dedicated in other areas, and we simply aren't going to be able to do that program, or that is our recommendation and assumption. So really, for you as a commission, as I see, as we move through this and kind of summarize, really, there's not a lot of extra dollars from our standpoint, from where we sit at staff, from the financial standpoint. We've dedicated the dollars where we think the priorities are. If these aren't your priorities, I think that's an area you want to recommend to the council that we don't quite have it right. Are we spending the dollars in the right area? I mentioned before, the Marshlands project is not funded. We're really looking at these priorities for these particular projects. Last, let me finish up here very quickly. Let you know. The numerous assumptions, and what we shared with you tonight are those assumptions with all of these different projects. What does this mean to the council? As staff, we're going to come forward and say that this will require a 5% levy increase. Now, that doesn't mean your taxes are going to go up 5%, but we're going to have to find new revenue. The council could use some reserves to reduce that. They could cut more on the operating side. I've listed some of the operating expenses. They could choose not to fund some of these programs. That's certainly where we're going. But at this point in time, this is our assumption, and this starts a debate. How does that debate and process work? The decisions by the council on the budget are really not required until August and September. But here we are mid-June, or excuse me, mid-May. We've got to start in June, put the numbers together. July is a debate. August, we have to start getting our decision down so that by September 15th, the council can adopt what's called the maximum levy. So we've got a few months. We've got a debate. These are the assumptions we made. I do note that the current budget plan calls for elimination of market value homestead credit. That's in the House and Senate have proposed that for elimination in 2012 and 2013. That would have some impacts as the current plan. for residential properties to not have much of an impact and actually have some benefit. Now, whether that finally occurs and what the governor and the House and Senate agree to is still to be seen, but that certainly has the potential to minimize the impact on residential properties. And of course, the final budget decision is then made in December of each year. So with that, Commissioners, I'm here for questions, your comments, for discussion, and can help you move through a very long document, but a very, very important document. Thank you.
Chuck, the fuel increase, I think you said you were assuming an increase from $2.40 a gallon? Is
$2.80.
That $2.80 to $4. And then are you going to, will we have a contract to lock it in at for, or it could still go up from there?
The last 2 years we've done very well with contracting, and so it's always a decision that we look at early in the year. I mean, a year ago we were buying fuel at $1.75, which was great.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there were communities that locked in when fuel was at $1.80. When we were all paying $1.80, they had locked in at $2.80. So it's both sides, and so we look at that every year. It's just so happened this year, I don't know, if our crystal ball said lock it in February, and we did at $2.80, and right now we look like geniuses. Ask us next
Since
year,
it's almost
we'll try
right
to be
now.
geniuses again.
So, you know, one of the things that just springs to mind immediately is what are we doing in terms of long-term planning and for fuel conservation? Because you know, the prices presumably are going to continue to go up for the foreseeable future. And there have been some recommendations even in the, various documents. I think that 2050 document that was done talked about, you know, reducing fuel costs by going to hybrid or alternative fuels, doing less mowing of grass in our parks, which has other benefits as well. So can you talk to that a little bit?
Sure. I can maybe talk to it. I think Sean's probably even a better person to talk to it. She's really leads that effort. One of the things that we've done citywide, we have multi-divisions and everybody's involved in that. And so we do, as you said, we're looking at our, number one, our equipment. We have a group that says, okay, what can we do with equipment? What particular vehicles? For instance, our building inspectors, they don't need to drive like a squad car. You know, it's very difficult. You can't have a bicycle or electric car when somebody's, you know, speeding at 75 miles an hour. You want to, you know, our police cars need to be there, and our ambulances, okay. Well, we do look at our building inspectors and our engineers and the people that other need vehicles, and so we're moving those vehicles and starting that process. Sean has a very tough job trying to change that culture, but we're getting some good buy-in, and so it's going to take time as we really start switching our fleet over. And so we're looking at the various hybrids and vehicles, and right now we simply don't have a place for the fuel. Okay, we're going to need to put in potentially some alternative fuel sources. Okay, that's one of the things that we can look at in various types of vehicles that we purchase. We've got a no idling policy now that's brand new, and it's simply a change for some of our employees, and we have some excellent employees, but it's simply the way they did business for 25 years. And so it's simply changing those mores and the values that they have, and they're very good about it. We're making progress, but it's going to be slow. I really think it is, but we're making progress. Our fuel consumption is steady, if not actually the gallonage is actually going down a little bit. And so we're not increasing the amount of fuel. It's just that, you know, when you go from $1.75 to $4, simply blows the budget apart.
The potential location, is that going to be staffed with full-time people then, or how would that be staffed?
I think that Chief Lucan, commissioners, would tell you the answer to that is yes. So it'll be both. We're going to kind of a different type of situation where we may have 1 or 2 full-time people supplemented by part-time. And instead of our paid per call will actually sign up for a shift and become part-time employees. Rather than sitting at home waiting for a pager to go off, they'll actually sign up for a shift. So they'll actually be at the station. That's how we can provide quicker service. And so they'll sign up for shifts on that part-time basis. And so going to that is an evolution as well, and actually started in March of this year. So to answer your question, probably some full-time with additional part-time.
Yeah, you've addressed my concern because, you know, I love the location geographically, but one of my concerns, as you mentioned, it was the draw area of paid per call people, you know, is somewhat limited in that vicinity. But, you know, with the part-time being their firefighters, that, you know, that definitely addresses that concern.
And I don't want to go into any great details, but when you stop and think about the change from someone who literally, if a pager went off, they had to get to the station within 5 minutes. That reduces the field of where you can recruit for your fire station versus hiring someone as a part-timer. Okay?
No, I think that's a very good plan.
That part-timer needs to be at work. He needs to be at work and needs to be reliable. And so it really changes how we operate.
No, I like the sound of that plan. From the, you know, you'd mentioned the police department and the vests that they've got fans blowing everywhere. I'm just curious, doesn't someone make some kind of a machine that would dry and sanitize these overnight or something that, you know,
Yep.
I guess I see it atrocious that they'd have to put on something the next day that's been doing nothing but hanging in, you know, in front of a fan. I think
Sure.
they deserve better than that.
And I agree, and it's simply we're down to space. I mean, we've got, I must admit that my eyes were opened when Chief Tamala took me on the tour when we hired that. I mean, we literally are jammed into every inch and every space in the police department. And as a matter of fact, we're overflowing to the point where there are certain rooms that simply you can't get in, and the locker room is one of them. And so while there is equipment like that and there are things like that, we simply don't have a place to put it. And so we need to go to that next generation of things with the vests. And that was just one of the areas that struck me when I walked in seeing all that. We simply don't, that room can't handle, because it was built for so few officers, it can't handle the kind of equipment that we need to put in, and we don't have anywhere to put it.
Under this expansion, would we be able to accommodate that?
Yes, we would.
Okay, thank
I'd
you.
certainly,
That's-
I don't want to presuppose what the study is going to find, but if it doesn't, we're going to go back to the architect and say, get it right.
Okay, because that's kind of a major concern to me. One of the other concerns, of course, when you mentioned operational cuts for police and fire, could you give us some ideas of where they would come up with those cuts?
Sure. One of the areas that we've talked about for years simply being more efficient. We, as the City Council, as staff, we recommended that the city have a fairly substantial fund balance. So I don't want to shock you with numbers, but the city has nearly $7 million sitting in the bank for operating costs. Okay? What that means is because we only get taxes in July, December every year, everybody gets paid. So we may have $7 million in January. My gosh, all of a sudden the end of June, we don't have very much money in the bank. And so it's that reserve. Well, the one area that we have in the police department has a $500,000 budget for overtime. Okay? Some years they need it. If we have, heaven forbid, a murder within the city, which takes a lot of excess time, or some large event, a storm or some type of thing that takes a lot of extra staff time, that's what we budget for. And so we likely will be looking at trying to combine having some reserves, using some of the reserves to cover the excess times, and then if we have a large event, cutting somewhere else, versus having money set aside in the police department budget. In addition, our police department is changing. We simply are hiring 2 to 3 people in our police department nearly every quarter. We have retirements, people leaving, changes, injuries, things like that. And so one of the things that we typically do is budget for all 55 officers. Even though right now, I'd ask Chief Tamale, he'd say, gee, I only got 51 people right now. Okay? But it takes a long time to fill positions, and so we could take advantage of that particular budget. So we want to stay with 55 officers, although we may only have 53 at any one point in time.
And one other question I had, do you know what the approximate life expectancy is of a fire truck in Maplewood?
We have
Or
some
how
of
long
our
we
fire
normally-
trucks that are 30-some years old because we store them inside. Somewhere in that 25 to 30 years. That's pretty typical for some of the trucks. Some of them, you know, the ambulances get a lot more miles and they don't last, but we refurbish those. But our fire trucks, the large one, the $450,000 ones, you know, can last well over 30 years.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand that they do have a long life expectancy, but I just wanted to clarify that.
Right.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Commissioner Yingling.
Yeah, Chuck, looking at the Fish Creek numbers, I was a little surprised. It says $525,000 from Ramsey County. I thought they were only contributing $425,000.
Well, that's, my understanding is that their contribution is $175,000 a year, 3 times.
Okay.
So, but I will make a note and check on that, because that is what Mr. Kaneko informed me of.
Okay. That's great.
Let's hope so.
And the total cost, because I know the contract was just signed, and you know, the closing is later this year, presuming that the city council goes forward with all of this. And so the total cost seems higher than I was expecting to see. I
Sure.
thought the contract was for 1.9 million plus, then we've got servicing on the loan. I mean, basically what we've got is this bridging loan through the conservation fund. And so
Right.
ultimately, I think the project we're estimating is going to be somewhere between 2.2 to 2.6 million. So this has a total cost of 3.65.
Sure.
I'm just wondering where that difference is coming in. Is there
The
some-
difference comes to how we get to the city's share.
Okay.
Okay? We're assuming, this project assumes the development of the northern 20 acres.
Right.
Okay? So in order to develop it, we're proposing to put in the streets
I see.
and then assess it back to someone.
Okay.
By assessing it back, that allows us, you know, to get the developer to pay for it, but the costs of the streets and the sewer and everything are in that.
Has to be reflected up front,
Yep,
and then that
yep,
comes back
that-
out. Okay.
And that allows us, that's how we keep that really good bond rating. We don't
Right.
surprise Moody's.
Yeah.
You know, we don't want to say, oh, we were planning on 2 million, but we spent 3.6. We'd rather say, gee, we're planning on 3.6 and we only spent 2.
Okay, great. Thanks for clearing that up.
Commissioners, any other questions or comments? Yes, Commissioner.
No, and I apologize, because this isn't really within the purview of our commission, I know, but just reading through the CIP, the replacement of the vehicle equipment parallelogram lift, which I just love that name. I mean, it sounds like it's rather dire that this get done soon, and yet it's not till 2014. And I'm just wondering, is that really something that ought to be put off until 2014, or, I mean...
A lot of those decisions, you know, I leave to the mechanics and the people over there. How it's set is, I tell them, and in this case, I say, okay, you've got about $350,000 to replace equipment every year. You tell me what your priorities are. And so
Okay.
certainly they'd love to do it right away.
Yeah.
But they gave us the priorities, and so in that case, I don't overrule them. There's ways. We absolutely, I'm going to knock on wood, we absolutely talk safety, and so we don't do anything. If it's a safety issue, we will fund it. But in this case, they make the choices, and if it's an absolute safety issue, they will prioritize it number one, because they know safety comes first.
I appreciate that, being I'm also a consultant for the Minnesota Safety Council. So.
Thank you, sir.
I have one more?
Yes, you may.
Also on that safety issue, I don't know if it was last year or the year before, there were questions about the safety of some of the parks equipment, and I know some playground equipment even had to be removed. And so I'm just curious where we stand on that and how the Parks Commission felt about the overall plan.
Very good question, Commissioners. I think the Parks Commission, on one hand, I mentioned that we're going from 45,000 to 100,000, but that's part of the reason that I set the stage of saying, okay, where do you spend the money? I mean, certainly we could use more, and there are areas of equipment where we're simply saying, this is not safe, we have to remove it. But by making a step of 45,000, and now we're going to commit 100, and it actually commits $100,000 a year every year for the next 5 years. And so we're making that commitment, and we're going to say, okay, we're cutting some money out of the operating side of the expense in order to put it for that replacement. And so that might mean we may not be able to mow as much, or we may have one less plow driver, or we may not have quite as much money for overtime for the police department, or we might not have, just go right on down the line. And it's those choices that we are going to spend the next 3 to 4 months with all the commissions and the council saying, you have to make those choices. And so that's what it's all about. And so you're absolutely right. I can't guarantee that this is going to solve that problem. But I would say the Parks Commission, I think like all the other commissions, understand that in tough times in government, this is all about choices and prioritizing. And so getting additional money when everybody else is cutting, the Parks Commission recognized that that was quite a good system when a lot of the other areas are being cut.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, I would be willing to entertain a motion to approve the capital improvement plan.
So moved.
And do we have a second?
Second.
With a motion is made and seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion is passed. And I thank you very much, Mr. All, for your presentation and all your questions and answers.
Commissioners, I would remind you that it would be appropriate either for you to direct the staff to deliver your recommendation to the Planning Commission tomorrow night, or have one of your members, but I would also ask that you have a member potentially available for the City Council meeting next Monday to also deliver your recommendation. But again, staff could do that for you, but I would suggest that if you had a member, it would be good.
Thank you, appreciate that. Sean, just a quick question. Could you present this tomorrow night, or are one of the commissioners available? And I'm not either, darn.
Mr. Chair, for the public hearing, Tom Ekstrand will be able to present your recommendations, and City Council, that's next Monday. If we had a volunteer available, but I can also follow up with an email and pose that question.
Yeah, probably an email.
Okay.
I need to check my calendar. I think I am in town and available that night, but...
I'll do that. I will follow up with an email regarding Monday night's meeting. So
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to unfinished business, the chicken ordinance. Staff, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. Urban communities throughout the country are considering allowing chickens in residential zoning districts as a way of promoting urban agriculture and sustainability. So there has been some interest from Maplewood residents and the Environmental and Natural Resources Commission over the last year for allowing chickens in Maplewood for this purpose as well. The city's current zoning code does prohibit the raising and handling of poultry, which includes chickens, in all single-dwelling residential zoning in Maplewood. So the Environmental Commission did propose a draft ordinance, and that was recommended for approval last year already, July 19th of last year. And at that time, the commission was recommending allowing up to 10 chickens on a residential lot with a permit. So we brought that before the Planning Commission. They're required to review this as well because it's a change in the zoning code. And the Planning Commission had some mixed thoughts on the subject matter, and ultimately, after 2 meetings, recommended denial of the ordinance by a vote of 4-3. However, there were some commissioners that had voted against the ordinance that indicated, had they been given a little bit more time to deal with such issues as possible nuisance factors to surrounding residential properties, they may have been more supportive of that ordinance. Because of the split decision between the Environmental Commission and the Planning Commission, we brought it to the council for a workshop to gauge their opinion on the matter. And during this workshop, which was March 7th of this year, the council did have several questions and concerns, and then ultimately, there wasn't a vote taken, but it appeared that perhaps there was a majority of the city council that expressed support for allowing chickens in residential zoning districts. So the city council did request that staff bring this back to the Environmental Commission for a final wrap-up and then a first reading with the council. So we ran out of time last meeting, which was April 18th. I think we were kind of exhausted from other issues, but we had presented the chicken ordinance once again, and during that time, Commissioner Yingling had offered to take on reviewing that ordinance and kind of wrapping it up and making sure that we addressed all the Planning Commission and City Council concerns. So she took a look at the ordinance and compared it to recommendations for municipal regulation of urban chickens, and this is a document that is endorsed by the Humane Society. And a summary of some of the changes that are being proposed for your final review of the chicken ordinance tonight is requiring new construction requirements for the chicken coop, run, and yard, adding a definition for exercise yard, modifying the definition of a run, modifying the definition of a chicken coop, and then adding a requirement for the disposal of dead birds. So these changes should address 2 of the concerns that were expressed by Planning Commission and City Council, basically to establish space requirements on a per-bird basis that will result in the sliding scale of birds per lot. However, we're not recommending that we increase the maximum number of 10, but that this would prohibit mainly smaller lots from having more chickens than they could possibly accommodate with the size requirements for the coop, the run, and the exercise yard. So I highlighted the changes for you on the ordinance in your staff report, and tonight we're hoping to get a final recommendation from our commission and bring this to the City Council for a first reading on June 27th as a tentative date. So with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
Commissioners. Okay, I have one. I do have a problem with, let's see, it would be on page 5, and it would be item 5G at the very bottom of the page. The climate control, adequate heater, fan ventilation, etc., to maintain temperature. I'm completely concur with that, but I'm wondering how they're planning on getting the electricity there. And I guess when I start thinking of extension cords and outdoors and snow and ice and kids and everything else, and people are not realizing that even outdoor extension cords are not designed for long-term outdoor usage, I guess I'd like to see a requirement that the coops would actually have to be hardwired in and in compliance with city electrical codes. Otherwise, we're creating either a potential fire hazard or an electrocution hazard.
Mr. Chair, I've learned a lot about chickens in the last year, and one thing I have learned is that the chickens, you don't actually have to heat those chicken coops. However, this condition does state, based on the Humane Society's recommendation, that the chicken coop have climate control, so adequate heater, fan, ventilation, and or insulation to maintain the coop temperature between 32 and 85 degrees Fahrenheit. And I think what I have learned is just that proper insulation and ventilation is adequate. So, maybe we don't need to specify that you should have a heater or a fan.
Okay. And is there anything in here, maybe I missed it, something as far as the general appearance of a chicken coop, so that it isn't in and of itself an eyesore?
That's a very good
You know,
comment,
otherwise I
yeah.
could run down to Home Depot and buy some leftover junk lumber and throw together a lot of things that technically would conform, but would be kind of an eyesore to the neighborhood.
Very good comment, and in some of our ordinances covering sheds or fences, we speak of must be in workmanship type, something to that effect, some language like that that implies it has to be built sturdy and look pretty good. So we could add something to that effect. And then also...
That's some pretty interesting language.
build it sturdy, make it look good. And then...
Can we incorporate something that would address appearance into this?
Yes. And also, the building code, if a chicken coop was more than 120 square feet in area, would require a permit. So that's based on our code. So I don't imagine that we'd have too many that were larger than that.
Recommendations.
Yeah.
Commissioners? No other questions or comments? Commissioner Johansson.
You had brought up that point about the appearance and so on, and I'm thinking that, well, first of all, we're talking about 10 chickens, or not a huge number of chickens, but then if we're talking about building codes being necessary, at least that people would have to fulfill all the requirements for regular building codes, you'd have to make sure that these things are also, if they're small, that they are well anchored and couldn't be pushed around, that in the case of, a yard where it would be in an area where there wouldn't be that much by way of, foliage around that would catch it or whatever, that can be a problem. I mean, these things can be tossed around, and if they aren't well anchored in the ground, you're going to have some chicken coops flying all over the place in the neighborhood.
Oh, goody.
Mr. Chair, our shed requirements would come into play. We don't require anchoring of a shed. And based on the Humane Society's space requirements, they speak of 4 square feet per bird. So we'd be looking at a 40-square-foot structure. And there's some chicken coops that are designed to actually move around the yard, where the chickens run on the bottom portion and then nest on the top. And then you can move the chicken coop around your yard to trouble spots where you have whatever mites or whatever chickens eat, I don't know. So they're movable.
Any other comments or questions? Hearing none, I would be, oh, did you have one, Jim? Hearing none, I would be willing to entertain a motion.
I move that we adopt the ordinance with the additional language suggested or offered by staff regarding appearance of the chicken coops.
And do I have a second for that motion?
Second.
Motion has been made and seconded. Commissioners, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That would be me. I'd like to go on record as opposed.
Thank you for that and the long year process that we spent on. So the permit fee and all that will have to be resolved with the council through ordinance. It used to be through resolution, but I guess we're required to put that in an ordinance. So that's something that we'll still have to determine with our council if it's adopted. So thank you very much, and tentatively this is scheduled for June 27th with our council for a first reading.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to 2011 goal implementation strategies.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the Commission. So January 13th, the Commission did hold a goal-setting meeting, and during that meeting, you determined that you would continue the implementation of your 2010 goals into 2011, which included trash hauling, greenways, and neighborhood environmental groups. Then on April 18th of this year, the Commission did review those goals and determine how to best implement those goals for 2011. You reviewed strategies and discussed other options. However, we didn't have a quorum during that meeting, so we didn't quite resolve everything. So I thought I'd bring it up once again. So in summary, the trash hauling, we did determine that the subcommittee would be disbanded and new members would be placed on our new trash hauling working group. And of course, this is the group that's conducting analysis and review of various collection systems and reporting the findings to the City Council. And that'll continue on until end of June. We'll have those trash hauling working group meetings. And Chair Schreiner, you weren't here, but you were appointed to that trash hauling working group, and if you can make it, that'd be great. Otherwise, we do have two commissioners, Commissioner Yingling and Tripler on that, as well as two council members. So that's moving along. Then on the greenways, we really didn't come to any kind of conclusion at the last meeting, but we are this year concentrating on the Holloway Beaver Creek Greenway and scheduling some programming around that particular greenway, which was chosen mainly because of the natural resource projects that we had planned. And the subcommittee this year did design a general greenway brochure, and then each of our 4 greenways will have its own individual brochure. And we were able to mail out those brochures along with some programming information to everyone in that Holloway Beaver Creek Greenway. So I think that'll be a real key educational piece for people that live in that greenway. So future implementation, we'll probably look at programming for the Phelan Chain of Lakes Greenway next year. And this was chosen because of several city, watershed district, conservation district, and county projects, namely Gladstone neighborhood improvements, the watershed districts holding shoreland and rainwater garden cost share programs at various churches in that greenway, and also the Phelan Chain of Lakes master plan that was approved by the county. So, you know, how will we continue on with that? Do you still want to have that subcommittee, and if so, members that would want to be involved? And then finally, the neighborhood environmental groups. So this group did focus on supporting neighborhoods and taking action to improve their environment. And in 2010, the focus was really energy conservation and energy efficiency. So we were able to spotlight that, which was kind of exciting, in our March and April Spotlight on Maplewood show, which Commissioner Johannesson had a great interview, and I have the tape for you. Remind me to give it to you if you haven't seen it already. You've seen it? Oh, excellent. Yeah, you did a really great job, and we were able to kind of get the word out there. But, you know, really future implementation strategies, what would that include? And I thought a great idea would be the creation of a green neighborhood guide or web page. So this would kind of be a best practices guide for neighborhoods. So you grab it and you say, well, my neighborhood's interested in energy conservation, and here's all the best practices you could do, or the resources that the city could offer or other entities could offer, like Xcel Energy or our Nature Center. So that would be a really good idea to help neighborhoods become involved in environmental projects with the rest of their neighbors. And then also working more closely with the Maplewood Nature Center during their neighborhood-based programmings. You know, they have a lot of, like they bring together neighbors for buckthorn removal and things like that. So with that, I think we just want to wrap up our implementation on that greenway and the neighborhood groups. So I'll just leave it open for discussion.
Commissioners?
Are we just
Commissioner
looking for volunteers for it?
Well, I think last year on the Greenways, we had the subcommittee, and it was Commissioner Tripler and Yingling, and then on the neighborhood groups, it was a subcommittee also with Commissioners Edmondson, Johannesson, and Mason Sherrill. So if you wanted to continue those subcommittees and keep moving forward with what we've started.
That be a consensus of the commission, or?
Yes.
Okay, so then we'll just keep things moving forward as it formerly was.
Let inertia keep us going forward.
Let
right?
inertia keep working.
Great. So we'll be in contact, staff will, with the greenways and neighborhood groups